The Martinez family mansion had always felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Even as a child, visiting my grandparents for mandatory Sunday dinners, I'd find myself pausing in certain hallways, overcome by déjà vu. The curve of the grand staircase, the way sunlight fell through the stained glass windows in the library, the peculiar echo of footsteps in the east wing. It all resonated with something deep in my memory. Elena, stop dawdling. Grandmother would snap, catching me running my fingers along the mahogany wainscoting. A lady doesn't touch the walls. But I couldn't help it. The house called to me, like it held secrets I was meant to discover. Now, at 35, standing in that same foyer with my adopted son Michael's hand in mine, I finally understood why. Mrs. Harrison, the housekeeper's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Your grandparents are waiting in the study. I squeezed Michael's hand reassuringly. At 6 years old, he was already too perceptive, picking up on the tension thrumming through the house. It's okay, Mio, I whispered. Remember what we talked about? He nodded solemnly, his dark eyes serious beneath his unruly curls. Best behavior. No whining. No touching anything. That's right. This won't take long. But as we approached the study, I knew I was lying to myself. This conversation had been brewing for months, ever since I'd announced my decision to adopt Michael. My grandparents' reaction had been predictably cold. A Mexican orphan, grandmother had said during that first phone call, her voice dripping with disdain. Really, Elena, if you're so desperate for a child, we could have arranged a proper adoption. There are agencies that specialize in better backgrounds. I'd ended that call abruptly, but the comments kept coming. Subtle digs during family events, pointed remarks about bloodlines and heritage, casual mentions of other potential heirs who had real claims to the Martinez fortune. The study door swung open, revealing my grandparents in their usual positions. Grandfather behind his massive desk, grandmother perched on the antique settee by the window. They looked like aristocrats from another era, which I suppose they were, in their minds at least. Elena, grandfather's voice was clipped. Punctual as always. His eyes fell on Michael, narrowing slightly. I see you brought the boy. Michael, I corrected firmly. Your great-grandson's name is Michael. Please sit. Grandmother gestured to the leather chairs facing the desk. Maria, bring us tea, and perhaps some juice for the child. Michael climbed into one of the oversized chairs, his feet dangling above the Persian carpet. He looked so small in that imposing room, surrounded by oil paintings of stern-faced Martinez ancestors. But his spine was straight, his expression composed. Pride swelled in my chest. My son might not have their blood, but he had more dignity in his little finger than they had in their entire bodies. We've asked you here today, grandfather began, shuffling through papers on his desk, to discuss a matter of some delicacy. As you know, your father's passing last year significantly altered the family's succession plans. My father's death had been unexpected. A heart attack at 58. We hadn't been close, his dedication to the family business leaving little time for actual family, but his death had still left a hole in my life. More significantly, it had left a hole in the Martinez family hierarchy. As an only child, I was suddenly next in line for everything: the business, the properties, the responsibility of carrying on the family name. The Martinez legacy spans 6 generations, grandmother added, accepting a teacup from Maria. 6 generations of careful marriages, strategic alliances, and proper breeding. Surely you understand why we have concerns about your recent decisions. If you mean my decision to adopt Michael, I said evenly, I don't see how that affects anything. He's my son, legally and in every way that matters. But he's not a Martinez. Grandfather's voice was sharp. Not really. The family trust is quite specific about bloodlines and inheritance. We've had our lawyers review everything, and they agree. Adopted children have no claim to the primary estate. I felt Michael stiffen beside me. Though young, he was old enough to understand rejection when he heard it. I placed a protective hand on his shoulder. That's fascinating, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Especially since I distinctly remember you telling me that family was about more than blood when you took me in after my mother disappeared. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grandmother's teacup clattered against its saucer. Grandfather's face went through several interesting color changes. That was different, he sputtered. Was it? Because I've been thinking a lot about that lately. About how quickly you stepped in to raise me when Mom vanished. About how you never seemed to look for her, never filed a missing persons report. About how familiar this house has always felt. Elena, grandmother's voice held a warning. Some things are better left in the past. But I wasn't finished. I hired a private investigator last month. Would you like to know what he found? Grandfather stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This meeting is over. Take the boy and go. His name is Michael, I said again, standing as well. And we're not going anywhere until we discuss the DNA test results I received yesterday. The color drained from grandmother's face. Grandfather gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. In the heavy silence, I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel, marking seconds that felt like hours. What DNA test? Grandmother finally whispered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. It's interesting, isn't it? How much family secrets can cost. How much people will pay to keep them buried. But you know what's even more interesting? I placed the envelope on grandfather's desk. How much truth can reveal itself through simple genetics? Mammy? Michael's voice was small, uncertain. Can we go home now? Soon, Mio, I promised, not taking my eyes off my grandparents. First, we need to hear a story. A story about a young maid who worked in this house 29 years ago. A maid who caught the attention of the family's only son. A maid who disappeared shortly after giving birth to a baby girl. Grandmother's teacup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the study like a gunshot. Her name was Isabella Ramirez. I continued, my voice steady despite the thunder of my heart. She was 16 when she started working here, 17 when she caught my father's eye, 18 when she disappeared. You have no proof. Grandfather's voice was hoarse. These are wild accusations. I opened the envelope, spreading its contents across his desk. Birth records from St. Mary's Hospital. Police reports that were mysteriously never filed. Bank transfers to an account in Mexico. And DNA results showing that Isabella Ramirez was my biological mother. Michael watched wide-eyed as papers scattered across the polished mahogany. He might not understand everything happening, but he knew this moment was important. What did you do to her? I asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted me for decades. Grandmother stood shakily, smoothing her silk dress with trembling hands. We did what was necessary. For the family. For you. For me? I laughed bitterly. You sent my mother away, erased her existence, and raised me as your granddaughter. All for me. Your father was engaged to Margaret Wellington. Grandfather snapped. The merger between our companies would have secured the Martinez empire for generations. We couldn't let some maid's indiscretion ruin everything. Indiscretion? The word tasted like poison. I was a baby, a human being, not some scandal to be covered up. We give you everything, grandmother insisted. The best schools, the finest clothes, a place in society. If people had known the truth. If people had known the truth? What? That the great Martinez family wasn't as pure as they pretended. That your precious son got a teenage maid pregnant and you paid to make her disappear. Grandfather slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. We paid her well. Set her up with a new life in Mexico. She agreed never to contact you. Did she agree, or did you threaten her? The silence that followed was answer enough. How much? How much did my mother's silence cost? $50,000, grandmother whispered, and a promise that you would be cared for. The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000. That's what they thought a mother's love was worth. That's what they paid to steal my heritage, my identity, my truth. And now you have the audacity to tell me my son isn't real family? I pulled Michael close to me. That he doesn't deserve to inherit because he's adopted. Because he's Mexican. That's different, grandfather began. But I cut him off. No, it's exactly the same. You're still trying to control who belongs in this family based on your twisted ideas of blood and status. Well, guess what? By your own logic, I'm not a real Martinez either. I'm the daughter of a Mexican maid you paid to disappear. But you're still blood. Grandmother protested. Still our great-granddaughter. And Michael is still my son. I shot back. My child, whom I chose to love, just as you chose to raise me. Or was that just about protecting your precious reputation? I pulled another document from my bag, this one fresh from my lawyer's office. I'm not just here about the DNA test. I've spent the last month digging through property records, trying to understand why this house always felt so familiar. Grandfather's face went ashen. Elena, imagine my surprise when I discovered that this mansion wasn't built by Martinez money at all. It was inherited through marriage, specifically through my grandmother's side of the family, the Ramirez side. I spread out the property records, yellowed with age but clear in their implications. Isabella Ramirez wasn't just any maid. She was the granddaughter of the original house staff, whose family had served here for generations. She grew up in the servants' quarters, playing in these halls just like I did. That's why everything feels familiar. This house is in my blood, but not the way you thought. Grandmother sank back onto the settee, her composure finally cracking. How did you find all this? Property records are public, and old servants talk, especially when someone asks the right questions. Maria? I called out, knowing the housekeeper was listening from a hallway. Would you join us, please? Maria entered, her gray hair neat under her cap, her spine straight despite her years. She'd been here as long as I could remember, always watching, always silent. Until now. I knew Isabella, she said quietly, helped raise her after her parents died. Watched her grow up in these halls, and I watched them send her away when she needed us most. You knew. Grandmother's voice was barely a whisper. All these years. We all knew, Maria replied. The whole staff knew. We kept your secrets, protected your lies, but we never forgot. I took Michael's hand, drawing strength from his presence. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over control of the family trust to me, not as your granddaughter, but as Isabella Ramirez's daughter, the rightful heir to both sides of this legacy. And if we refuse, grandfather's attempt at defiance was weakened by the tremor in his voice. Then everything comes out. The pregnancy, the cover-up, the payoff. I wonder how the board of directors would react to learning that their chairman engineered the disappearance of a teenage girl, or that the great Martinez family fortune is built on stolen inheritance and buried secrets. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, its deep tones reverberating through the heavy silence. Finally, grandfather reached for his pen. What will you do? Grandmother asked as he began signing the papers my lawyer had prepared. With the business, the house, everything. I looked down at Michael, who had been watching the entire scene with quiet dignity. I'm going to build something new, something honest, a legacy that doesn't depend on lies and shame. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and financial transitions. My grandparents retired to their villa in Spain, their carefully constructed world of privilege and pretense crumbling around them. The family business underwent a transformation, with new policies emphasizing transparency and ethical practices. But the real work was personal. With Maria's help and my investigators' contacts, I finally tracked down Isabella Ramirez. She was living in a small town outside Mexico City, teaching at a local school. The woman who opened the door to my knock had my eyes, my smile, and 29 years of pain etched into her face. Elena, she whispered, reaching out to touch my cheek, as if she couldn't believe I was real. Mom, I replied, the word feeling both foreign and deeply right on my tongue. We spent hours talking, crying, sharing the stories of our separated lives. She told me about growing up in this very house, about falling in love with my father despite knowing it was forbidden, about being given an impossible choice. They said you would have a better life without me, she explained, tears rolling down her cheeks. That you would be educated, privileged, protected. I was so young, so scared. I convinced myself they were right. They weren't, I said firmly, holding her hand. No privilege is worth losing your mother. When I introduced her to Michael, she wept again, this time with joy. My grandson, she said in Spanish, gathering him into her arms. Mi nieto precioso. Michael, who had been learning Spanish since I adopted him, replied shyly, Hola, abuela. The Martinez mansion has changed now. The stern portraits of past patriarchs have been replaced with photographs showing the true history of the house, including pictures of the generations of staff who kept it running. The servants' quarters have been converted into a community center, offering education and support to immigrant families. Isabella, my mother, splits her time between Mexico and here, teaching Spanish and sharing stories about the house's history. Michael adores her, soaking up the language and culture that should have been my birthright. Last week, we hosted a family dinner in the formal dining room. But instead of the cold, hierarchical affairs I remember from childhood, this one was warm and loud and real. Maria and the other staff sat with us as equals. My mother's laughter rang through the halls. Michael ran around the table, no longer constrained by rules about proper behavior. "Mommy," he asked later that night as I tucked him into bed, "are we a normal family now?" I thought about our unconventional household, the adopted son, the long-lost mother, the staff-turned-family, all the hidden stories finally brought into the light. "No, Mio," I replied, kissing his forehead. "We're not normal. We're real, and that's much better." The next morning, I found my mother in the library, running her fingers along the same mahogany wainscoting that had always drawn me. "I used to do this too," she said, smiling at the memory. "The house remembers, even when people try to forget." "Did you ever think you'd be back here?" I asked, joining her by the window. "Never," she admitted. "But life has a way of bringing truth to light. Your son taught me that." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Because you chose him with love, just as I chose to have you. The Martinezes never understood that family isn't about blood or status or inheritance. It's about love, about choice, about seeing the truth in each other's hearts." As if summoned by our conversation, Michael appeared in the doorway, proudly carrying a book of Spanish stories Maria had given him. "Abuela," he called out, "will you read with me?" My mother's face lit up with joy. "Of course, my amor. Come, sit with us." As I watched them settle onto the window seat, sunlight streaming through the stained glass and casting rainbow patterns across their faces, I finally understood why this house had always called to me. It wasn't just the physical structure that felt familiar. It was the echoes of love, of belonging, of truth that had been buried but never forgotten. The Martinez family legacy didn't end with my revelation. It was reborn, transformed into something stronger and more beautiful than mere bloodlines could create. In the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the property or the family name. It was the courage to choose love over pretense, truth over tradition, and real family over rigid rules about who belongs and who doesn't. Every Sunday now, we still have family dinners in the big house. But instead of cold silence and careful manners, the rooms ring with laughter, with stories in English and Spanish, with the sound of children running through halls that once echoed only with whispered secrets. And in these moments, I look at my chosen son and my found mother, at the family we've built from the ashes of lies. And I know that some inheritances are worth more than all the Martinez millions combined. They say home is where the heart is. But sometimes, home is also where the truth finally breaks free, where long-buried love resurfaces, and where new stories begin. In the end, that's the only legacy worth passing on. When your stepdaughter tells you she's dying, the last thing you expect is to be caught in an elaborate lie. But that's exactly what happened to me last spring. And it cost me more than just money. It shattered my faith in family and forced me to question everything I thought I knew about love and trust. I'm Catherine Walsh, 52, married to Tom for the past 15 years. His daughter Ashley was 12 when we first met, and I'd spent years trying to be the perfect stepmother, supportive but not pushy, loving but respectful of boundaries. Now, at 27, Ashley had grown into a beautiful young woman with her father's charm and her late mother's delicate features. The day everything changed, I was in my home office reviewing client files for my real estate business when Ashley called, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Can you come to the hospital?" she managed between sobs. "Please don't tell Dad yet. I need you." I'd never heard her sound so vulnerable. Despite our generally good relationship, Ashley usually went to her father first with any problems. This was different. An hour later, I sat in a sterile consultation room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding Ashley's trembling hands as she told me the news that would set everything in motion. "It's stage 4 pancreatic cancer," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They're getting me 6 months, maybe less." My world tilted on its axis. Ashley was young, healthy, had her whole life ahead of her. She'd just gotten engaged to James, her boyfriend of 2 years, and they were planning a small wedding for next year. "Oh, sweetheart," I pulled her into my arms, my own tears falling now. "We'll get other opinions, the best doctors, experimental treatments, whatever it takes." She shook her head against my shoulder. "I don't want to spend my last months in hospitals. I want to marry James. I want one perfect day before, She couldn't finish the sentence. Of course, I said immediately. We'll move the wedding up. Whatever you need. But I want it to be special. Ashley looked up at me, her green eyes swimming with tears. The wedding I've always dreamed of. At the Peninsula Hotel, with the crystal ballroom and the garden terrace. I know it's expensive. Don't worry about the money, I heard myself say. I'll take care of everything. The Peninsula Hotel was one of Chicago's most exclusive venues with a 2-year waiting list for weddings. But I had connections through my real estate work and money could make things happen quickly. I'd have to sell my vacation home in Michigan, the one thing I'd kept from my life before Tom. But what was a house compared to giving my dying stepdaughter her dream wedding? Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The way Ashley insisted on keeping her diagnosis secret from everyone except James and me. How she didn't want her father involved in the wedding planning. The convenient excuse that she didn't want him to worry to see him suffer through another loss after her mother's death from breast cancer 15 years ago. But grief and panic have a way of blinding you to things you might otherwise question. I threw myself into planning the perfect wedding, pulling every string I had to make it happen in just 6 weeks. The Peninsula's events manager was an old client who owed me a favor. The florist was a friend who agreed to work overtime. The designer boutique that had Ashley's dream dress made alterations their top priority after I explained the situation. Money flowed out of my accounts like water. The venue deposit alone was $50,000. The dress was another $15,000. Flowers, catering, music, decorations. Every time I turned around, there was another bill to pay. Are you sure about this? Tom asked one night as I reviewed the catering contract. It seems like an awful lot for a wedding that's being planned so quickly. She deserves it, I said firmly, not meeting his eyes. I hated lying to my husband, but I'd promised Ashley I wouldn't tell him about her diagnosis yet. And the Michigan house has been sitting empty anyway. It's time to let it go. The house sold quickly, the market was hot, and I priced it to move. The proceeds covered most of the wedding expenses, though I still had to dip into my retirement savings for the rest. Ashley threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that sometimes seemed at odds with her supposed condition. There were no visible symptoms of her illness, but I told myself that was the blessing of youth and good genes, that she was putting on a brave face. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was at Ashley and James' apartment, dropping off some samples for the table settings. They weren't home, but I had a key for emergencies. I was leaving the samples on their dining table when I knocked over Ashley's purse. As I picked up the scattered contents, a medical report fell out of a folder. My heart stopped as I read the letterhead. It was from Northwestern Memorial, dated just a few days ago. But it wasn't a cancer diagnosis. It was a pregnancy test. Positive. 12 weeks along. My hands shook as I read further. No mention of cancer. No terminal diagnosis. Just a routine prenatal checkup report showing a healthy mother and a healthy baby. The front door opened before I could process what I was seeing. Ashley walked in, stopped dead when she saw me holding the report. I can explain, she said quickly, but her face told me everything I needed to know. There was no cancer. There never had been. I sank into a chair, the report crumpling in my grip. Why? Was all I could manage to say. Ashley's face crumpled, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or just another performance. James's parents are super religious, she said, her voice small. They would never accept a pregnant bride. We needed the wedding to happen quickly, before I started showing. And we couldn't afford the kind of wedding they'd expect from their only son. The room spun as the magnitude of her deception hit me. I'd sold my beloved lake house, the last connection to my late parents, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. I drained my retirement account, all for a lie. Does James know? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He had to be part of it. No one could fake that level of concerned devotion I'd seen from him these past weeks. Ashley nodded, unable to meet my eyes. It was his idea to say it was cancer. He knew about your lake house, knew you'd do anything if he thought I was dying. The calculation in those words made me physically ill. They targeted my deepest fears, my love for my stepdaughter, my memories of her mother's death, all to fund their perfect wedding. But the worst was yet to come, because what Ashley said next would reveal an even darker side to their deception, one that would shake our family to its very core. You don't understand, Ashley said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. James isn't just worried about his parents finding out about the baby. He needs this wedding to happen now because of the inheritance. I stared at her, still clutching the medical report. What inheritance? His grandfather's trust fund. James stands to inherit $5 million. But there's a catch. He has to be married in a socially appropriate manner before he turns 30. That means a big wedding, at a prestigious venue with all the right people attending. If he doesn't meet the requirements, the money goes to his cousin instead. The pieces started falling into place. And when does he turn 30? Next month, Ashley whispered, right after the wedding. My mind raced back through everything I knew about James. The prestigious law firm job he just left to start his own practice. The expensive clothes and watches he somehow afforded on a starter lawyer's salary. The way he'd encourage Ashley to dream bigger for the wedding, knowing I would pay for it all. So this was never about the baby, I said slowly. You used my love for you, made me think you were dying. Also, James could get his hands on his trust fund. Ashley's face hardened slightly. We're going to pay you back with interest. As soon as James gets the inheritance. Do you hear yourself? I cut her off. You faked having cancer, Ashley. Cancer. Do you have any idea how many families would give everything they have for their loved ones to not have that diagnosis? How many people are actually fighting for their lives right now? She had the grace to look ashamed, but only briefly. What's done is done. The wedding's in 2 weeks. Everything's paid for. You can't back out now. Watch me. I stood up, gathering the scattered contents of her purse. I'm telling your father everything. If you do that, Ashley's voice turned cold. I'll tell him about the affair. I froze. What affair? The one you're having with Michael Bennett, Dad's best friend. I saw you having lunch with him last month at the Four Seasons. Very cozy. I almost laughed. Michael Bennett is my real estate attorney. We were discussing the sale of my lake house. The one I sold to pay for your fake dream wedding. I have the billing records to prove it. But Dad doesn't know that, Ashley countered. And Michael's wife just left him. How do you think it would look? The secret meetings, the large bank transfers, the emotional distraction you've been showing lately. I sat back down, suddenly understanding the full scope of her manipulation. She'd planned this, created a backup story to keep me quiet if I ever discovered the truth. When did you become this person? I asked quietly. What happened to the sweet girl who used to help me bake cookies for the homeless shelter? Who cried when she found injured birds in the garden? Something flickered in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or just annoyance at being confronted with who she used to be. But before she could respond, we heard keys in the door again. James was home. He took in the scene, me with the medical report, Ashley's defensive posture, and his handsome face went blank. Not surprised, not angry. Just calculated. I see we're having a family discussion, he said smoothly, setting down his briefcase. Perhaps we should all talk this through calmly. There's nothing to discuss, I said, standing up again. The wedding's off. I'm calling the vendors tomorrow. James's smile didn't waver. That would be unwise, Catherine. You see, Ashley isn't the only one who's been watching and gathering information. He walked to his briefcase, pulled out a folder. Your real estate license is up for renewal next month. It would be a shame if the board received evidence of certain irregularities in your recent transactions. What irregularities? The lake house sale, for instance, sold well below market value, with some very creative accounting to avoid certain taxes. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, but investigations can be so time-consuming and damaging to one's reputation. My blood ran cold. He'd been planning this too, documenting everything I'd done to quickly sell my house and fund their wedding. Actions that, taken out of context and twisted the right way, could indeed look suspicious. You're blackmailing me, I said flatly. We prefer to think of it as protecting everyone's interests, James replied. The wedding happens as planned. 2 weeks later, I receive my inheritance. We then buy you a new lake house. Larger, better location. Everyone wins. I looked between them, my stepdaughter and her fiancé, both watching me with a mixture of threat and false sympathy. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time. They were perfect for each other, but not in the way I'd originally thought. Okay, I said quietly. You win. The wedding goes forward. They both relaxed slightly, James's smile turning triumphant. I knew you'd see reason. But I held up my hand. I have one condition. We tell your parents everything, James. Tonight. All of it. The baby, the trust fund requirements, everything. If they still want this wedding to happen, fine. But no more lies. Absolutely not, James snapped, his smooth facade cracking. My parents are coming to dinner at my house tonight. I finished for him. Ashley told me yesterday they'd accepted the invitation, so either you tell them or I will. They tried to argue, to threaten, to negotiate, but I stood firm. Either the truth came out on their terms or on mine. That night, over a dinner I could barely eat, James and Ashley confessed everything to his shocked parents. The pregnancy, the trust fund manipulation, the fake cancer diagnosis. What happened next surprised us all. James's father, a stern federal judge I'd only met twice, listened to the whole story in silence. Then he started to laugh. Did you really think we didn't know about the pregnancy? He asked his son. Your mother volunteers at that hospital. She saw Ashley's name on the patient list weeks ago. James went pale. But the trust fund requirements were meant to ensure you married someone you truly loved in a way that honored our family's values, his mother said quietly. Not to force you into an elaborate deception that hurt everyone around you. The money was never real, his father continued. The trust fund exists, yes, but the marriage clause was something I made up when I saw how materialistic you were becoming. I wanted to see what you would do, if you would choose love and honesty, or if you would scheme your way to what you wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. James looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Ashley was crying, but this time I thought the tears might actually be real. The wedding is canceled, I said into the silence. I'm calling everyone tomorrow. No one argued. The next few weeks were a blur of cancellations, refunds, and difficult conversations. I told Tom everything, showing him the evidence of Ashley's deception. He was devastated, not just by her lies, but by how calculated and cruel she'd been. Some vendors took pity on us and refunded their deposits. Others kept them, understandably. I lost about 60% of what I'd spent, including the lake house. But somehow, that didn't hurt as much as losing my faith in the daughter I thought I'd raised. Ashley and James broke up 2 months later. Without the prospect of millions, their perfect partnership crumbled. She moved back home, humbled and genuinely remorseful for the first time. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said one night, finding me in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. But I want you to know that losing your respect hurts more than losing the wedding, the money, even James. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was 6 months pregnant now, showing clearly, her face stripped of the manipulative confidence she'd worn like armor. You know what the saddest part is? I said finally. If you just told me the truth from the beginning, about the baby, about wanting a nice wedding before you started showing, I would have helped. Not with selling my house, maybe, but I would have found a way, because that's what family does. I know that now, she whispered. I got caught up in James's dreams, his plans. I forgot who I was, who he raised me to be. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. Ashley had her baby, a girl she named Catherine after me. It was a peace offering, a promise to do better, to be better. I never did get the lake house back, but last summer, Ashley found a small cottage for rent on the same lake, just a few miles from my old place. She used her savings to rent it for a month, invited me to spend time there with her and the baby. It's not the same, I know, she said as we sat on the deck, watching the sunset over the water. But maybe we can make new memories here. Better ones, built on truth this time. I looked at my granddaughter, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, and felt something heal inside me. Not everything, some broken trust can never be fully repaired, but enough to move forward, to find a new kind of relationship with my stepdaughter. People often ask me if I regret not exposing Ashley and James more publicly, not making them face bigger consequences for their deception. But the truth is, they are facing consequences. James lost not just his inheritance but his family's respect. Ashley lost her dream wedding, her perfect fiancé, and had to rebuild her life as a single mother. And me? I lost a house but gained wisdom. I learned that sometimes the people we love most can hurt us deepest. But that doesn't mean we stop loving them. We just love them differently, more carefully, with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries. Last week, I received a letter from James's mother. Inside was a check for half of what I'd spent on the wedding. This doesn't make it right, she wrote, but it's a start. Thank you for having the courage to tell us the truth. You saved not just your family, but ours too. I haven't decided if I'll cash the check yet. Part of me wants to use it as a down payment on a new lake house. But another part thinks maybe it's better to let go of the past entirely, to build something new instead of trying to recreate what was lost. After all, that's what real love does. It builds new things from the ashes of what was broken, hoping that what rises will be stronger, truer, and more authentic than what came before.